pretty good frame. Okay. Recording there, and now let's just do a sound check while this loads. Can you count down from 10?
Me?
Yeah.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I'm going to bring the mic closer to you. So essentially you always want to be about a hand width away, or within a hand width away. So the closer the better. These mics are really great too. There we go.
Okay.
Perfect.
The last person in here did not have cooties.
You'll be happy to know I clean things regularly in here, so. Okay. And Sal, can you count down from 10?
You?
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, you guys sound great. Okay, fantastic. Record on there, and oops, they updated it.
Do not disturb on the phones.
There we go. Well, I can focus on it. Okay. Great. You all ready to go?
Now I have a big head. We're ready to go?
Yeah.
All right. Welcome to the Accidental Talmudist podcast. My guest today is Rabbi Abraham Cooper. He's the longtime Director of Global Social Action at the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Welcome, Rabbi Cooper.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
We, at the time that we're recording this, it's shortly after the holidays finally ended, the Jewish holidays that go on and on. When you're not Jewish and you work with a Jew at this time of year, you just can't believe that they're taking another Monday and Tuesday off and another Monday and Tuesday off.
Unless you move to Israel, in which case you don't have to pay the VAT of Galut of the 2nd and 8th day.
Or you don't get to take it, one way or the other. But you were just in Israel, and you're practically a commuter to Israel. So somebody who goes back and forth so often, why don't we just start by asking, what do you think are the essential differences, on a daily basis, walking down the street, having coffee in the morning? How is it different being in Israel as being here?
Well, look, the state of Israel is the first time in 2,000 years where the Jews are the majority. That means the achievements we do, the huge mistakes that are made. When you wake up in the morning, you're home. And in fact, everything that you do has a meaning to it. So as someone who lives outside of Israel, that feeling that when you're there, every minute that you're there has a special meaning. And also, I was a student back in 50 years ago, long time, 1968, just after the Six-Day War in Jerusalem. There were 177,000 residents, Jews and Arabs total.
Really? It was that little? 50
It was
years
a
ago?
little
Wow.
shtetl.
Okay.
And back then also, I had no direct blood relatives. Second and third cousins would do. Nobody had a car. TV was mostly black and white with nothing on it. A private phone? No, you went to the Makol at the local store, waited in line to what was called an asimon, a special kind of coin designed so you could speak. And if you wanted to call home, as I did once to congratulate my brother who just got engaged, it's no big deal. You made a reservation 3-4 days in advance. You went to the main post office, and you paid $25 for 3 minutes to speak to the United States. Fast forward, I'm blessed to have 2 of my 3 daughters living in Israel. I have 8 grandchildren, citizens of the state. I have nieces and nephews and an extended family when they get together at Sacco Park occasionally in Jerusalem. It's 40, 50 people. So both, personally, familially, it's kind of a revolution. But the other piece of it also is someone who travels a lot in that region, including in the Gulf, and I know many Arabs and Muslims. If you get around a little bit in the region, you realize how much of a daily miracle Israel is and life in Israel is, because it is a booming, now young country, and everyone knows that in 10, 15 years won't recognize it yet again. There are 9 million citizens and counting, and yet surrounded by failed states, by threats from Iran, by terrorism. We know all of the negatives, but the amazing thing is that the internal dynamics, and I think it's one of the biggest changes also for the future of Israel-diaspora relations, is we're now into second, third, fourth generation kids who were born, bred in Israel. It's their home. It's the majority population. It is a Jewish state, however one defines it. And I think that when you look towards the diaspora, a lot of us, including here in the States, we're fighting a rear guard action against anti-Semitism and hatred.
By rear guard, you mean we're reactionary?
Mostly.
Yeah.
And we can talk about whether that's the best path to take, but it's an understandable one. And in my job, global social action, I get a lot of the bad news early from a lot of different places. Countries like Sweden, long range, unsustainable in terms of a significant Jewish presence. They don't like the Jews there. They're not protecting them. And of course, we can go to much bigger venues, the mainstreaming of anti-Semitism by Corbett's Labour Party in the UK, the disaster the last almost now 20 years in France, Germany at the tipping point. I was in the Soviet Union as a student back in 1972, this time of year, in 6 cities.
You were assisting with refuseniks, is that right?
I grew up in the Soviet Jewry movement, and yes, a friend and I went as part of a more organized effort to, find out what's going on, aid and abet the refuseniks, and help in any way that we could. Actually, it was the greatest learning experience for me in my life, and to be exposed to Jews who didn't know an aleph from a bet, who were prepared to give up everything for what was then a completely hopeless dream. Now, if you had told me back in 1972 with the KGB lurking everywhere you went, you'd land up in the park bench with the drunks because you couldn't get away from them, that someday there would be Jewish schools, Chabad would run Jewish schools in Moscow, and Jews in France and elsewhere in Europe, and apparently now maybe in the States, would be afraid to show their Jewishness with a kippah or a Star of David on a necklace. I would say, well, come on over here. We're with the other drunks of Moscow or Rostov, and you look at the world now, and things, in a lot of ways, it just seems to be every day is Purim. So yes, primarily here it is a struggle. I'm talking Jewishly, especially, to make sure that you can not only maintain your own Jewishness, but transmit to your kids and to your grandchildren and to your neighbors that remaining Jewish is something that's a worthwhile exercise.
It's unbelievable. I mean, to set that in context, so you're working with the refuseniks, so just to define that for a second, what was a refusenik?
Well, back in the day of the great communist paradise, in the coldest times of the Cold War, after the Six-Day War especially, some Jews in the Soviet Union woke up and said, enough of this, I'm Jew. I have it stamped in my internal passport. Everybody had to be defined by their nationality. And nationality meaning was not, Judaism was not only a religion, but being Jewish was a nationality.
Within the Soviet Union.
Within the Soviet Union, which meant you were caught in a catch-22 situation. They didn't allow you to learn what it meant to be Jewish, but you couldn't escape your identity. And after Israel essentially destroyed all of that Soviet equipment and advisors and all the rest in that Six-Day War, this amazing resurgence of Jewish pride washed all over the world, but especially profoundly within the Soviet Union. And that ignited just an amazing, we'll say, renaissance of Jewish life, in many cases starting literally learning how do you, what is the alphabet? How do I get to Israel? Well, in the communist paradise in their constitution, they never had something built in about the right to emigrate. Who would want to leave the great socialist paradise? So the struggle to create reunification of families and other legal modalities against the backdrop of trying to help people like Sharansky and others. How do you get them out without getting enmeshed in the Cold War politics between East and West? And for me, as sort of a formulating and forming experience, looking back, something very important happened to me besides being inspired by these amazing people I met in the course of a month. It also revealed to me, as someone who was raised Orthodox, how powerful the Jewish people are when they're united in a cause. And that, I think, is what helps sustain that uneven, impossible struggle, is that Jews gave a damn. And guess what? When Jewish people give a damn, some of their neighbors will be inspired to say, I got to respect that. And we got a lot of help also from the Soviet Union, because any Western diplomat who was sentenced to serve in Moscow, or was called Leningrad, they would see these desperate Jews standing up for their own rights, and whatever their own religious or national affiliation was, they learned to really respect them. And so we ended up getting a lot of friends in high places in the State Department and elsewhere. A lot of what was called bipartisanship, which is, of course, today
the dodo bird.
Right, missing in action. We learned a lot, but all of that was based on a commitment of the generation after the Holocaust actually standing up for each other. And by the way, that wasn't a lesson that was imparted by Jewish federations initially, or the other structures.
It came from the Kishkas.
It came first and foremost from the State of Israel, which took a powerful but quiet role in this whole amazing effort over decades. And it came from people like a 17-year-old Glenn Richter, who was a junior at the MTA Yeshiva University in Manhattan, who ran the first protest in Manhattan at the age of 17, called in the next day by his principal and said, Richter, if you ever do anything like that again, it's going to go on your permanent record. You'll never get into college. Meaning that the changes that came about from younger generation did not yet have a voice, but understood in our kishkas that whatever it was that our parents' generation tried to do to help during the Shoah failed. And so something different had to happen. And you had people like Martin Luther King, and later Bobby Kennedy. It was a time of great social upheaval in America, but essentially it was young people, not only, but community activists who wouldn't take no for an answer, and they're the ones that eventually transformed the world Jewish community. So it was great. I went there myself to be at the Great Washington March in the 1980s. Sort of put an exclamation point on the Free Soviet Jewry movement. But I remember as a 14-year-old going across the street from the Soviet mission in New York City before they locked down that street with about 35 or 40 people, and this guy named Shlomo Kalbach singing a couple of songs at a model Seder, a grand total of 40 people. I didn't run it, I attended it, but I was inspired by other people. I remember the elder of the movement was a wonderful, great man by the name of Jacob Birnbaum of blessed memory. He was old. He was 25, came from the UK, and had a goatee. So like, wow, that guy, he was really... So, that sort of brought about some revolutionary changes. Also, my involvement in that movement when the infamous Leningrad Trials took place. That's when they tried that lunatic hijacking plot to get out of Russia, which the KGB knew about almost immediately. They put him on trial, and two of the participants were initially sentenced to die. So in the United States, there were
These
no.
guys were hijacking a plane to go to Israel?
Yes. You didn't hear
I don't
about
remember
it either.
that story, no.
You need to go back and Google it in Leningrad. Amazing story. So the Pope spoke out against the death sentences, but the organized American Jewish community did not initially. So about 1,000 students from Yeshiva University and Stern College for Women went down in buses to Washington on a Sunday for a peaceful demonstration led by Mayor Kahana, who gave an insane speech about, and we're going to stop all negotiations with the Soviets on nuclear. And then we marched quietly to, if you ever know, the Capitol Hilton on K and 17th in Washington. Well, we filled that street with 1,000 young protesters in front of the Soviet mission just down the block. Kahana was arrested within 5 minutes and probably out on bail within an hour. I didn't go to get arrested. I've never been arrested since. But I remember what it was like, to be in a one-man cell with 6 other students for a couple of hours, asking the officer, don't we get that phone call? And they said, no, you only get a call when you're arrested and you haven't been processed yet. Being in jail for a couple of hours was not pleasant, and in a lot of ways I think also inspired myself and others, saying, it shouldn't have to come to this. By the way, at the time, there were, I think, 960 young people who were arrested. The Washington Post reported the next day it was the largest nonviolent demonstration and arrest in the history of the city at a time when there was always a lot of violence. Of course, that would soon be superseded by anti-Vietnam in Cambodia.
Right, so we're in the mid-60s.
So we're actually
Now we're
sort
getting
of
toward the late 60s.
we're actually in late 1970 as this happened.
Oh.
So, Soviet Jewry experience was something that I think, for folks of my age who were still around, whatever their religious affiliation, it's something to look back on and say, can we recapture that again? Can we come together? And I hope not only because of anti-Semitism.
So thank you for sort of painting that picture, because what I wanted to say, what you hinted at a little bit earlier, was that now in America in 2019, it's difficult, to transmit Judaism to the second and third generations from ourselves. And it's crazy that we're saying that, because you're telling a story about a time in the Soviet Union when it was so difficult to be Jewish. You could get arrested for it, you could get shot for it, you could be sent to Siberia for it. You could really suffer for putting on tefillin once, And the fact that Jews were willing to take those risks and were so determined to get to Israel and to express and live their Judaism, and it energized the Jews of the United States. And here, it's never been so easy, at least since we had a temple. In the last 2,000 years, it's never been so easy to be a Jew. Kosher restaurants, places of worship to choose from, express yourself, say what you want, do what you want, and people don't bother.
Right. Well,
Judaism doesn't mean anything to
yeah,
them.
I don't have an easy answer for those people who choose to fully assimilate, but I think a good place to start is that, Judaism and faith in general, it's not a multiple choice test. You don't get to pick and choose and then say, well, this is my identification. There are many differences. The iPhone, the texting, the total, personal freedoms that come along. And I think also a kind of naivete, meaning you never really think about, well, what if the non-Jewish neighbor or fellow student or someone what do you even think about Jews? And there I think I have a bit of an advantage being involved in the fight against anti-Semitism. So here's a headline for you. Anti-Semites don't care if you wear a yarmulke or not, if you keep 613 commandments or 0. They don't like Jews. And for some, especially for some Jewish kids going to the dream campus, let's say Duke University, when you get there, even if you're just an incidental Jew, or maybe you went to Israel with birthright, if you don't think about it, you're going to have plenty of opportunities to reflect on how important, if at all, identifying as a Jew has meaning for you, because we do have the BDS and the other professional anti-Semites who are out there using campuses as backdrops for the effort to delegitimize Israel.
In a very professional and
Oh,
organized and
absolutely.
extensive effort.
Right, you can, I spoke to actually Jewish Journal a few hours ago, and a Bandler for the umpteenth time. This time at Duke University and what happened with Tzipi Livni. And he could have written the story 10 days ago. And as long as they continue to get coverage, as long as university officials don't grow a pair to actually stand up for all of their students, including, God forbid, Zionists, we'll continue to see this every week. And I was just thinking about it, I mentioned there, and I don't think they'll write about it, but could you imagine if there would be protesters against what's happening in Western China, or the destruction by Chinese authorities of churches across the country, or something that we're involved with, the creation of yet another 100,000 Kurdish refugees by Syria. So what do you think the response of the university at Duke would be if they tried to crash a tailgating party at next Saturday's ACC game, or if they really had guts, going out to the 50-yard line before the kickoff? We all know the answer to that question. So for a lot of young Jews today, their discovery of their Jewishness, or to put it another way, if they're already been raised Jewish, the decision of how far they're ready to go to defend their own honor is suddenly front and center, and they come back home and speaking to a mother or a grandparent where Judaism is sort of really just not top tier. Suddenly anti-Semitism has brought that home to a lot of folks. Now for Israelis coming to study or live here, it's kind of the reverse. They grew up in a Jewish society. They grew up in and around Jewish festivals, even if they didn't keep it. Never a question whether or not you remain a Jew. Well, welcome to the diaspora, where everything is on the table before you. And it's a kind of reverse mechanism about, for the first time, having to grapple with, what does it mean for me as an Israeli to be a Jew? And do I send our kids to a Jewish kindergarten and everything else that comes from there? So
I'm sure you've thought about this. I mean, you've been involved with the fight against anti-Semitism through your whole career at such high levels, and you're a rabbi and a thoughtful guy. I mean, did God give us anti-Semitism? Is it, a kind of horrific at times, and yet over time a gift in some ways?
I wouldn't look at it as a gift. I just think it's, you might say when you read the Torah and it says, if you follow the rules, it's going to be good, and if you don't, you're going to suffer. Unfortunately, a lot of those quote-unquote curses, they've already come true in terms of...
They've all come true, right? Over
Yeah,
time.
I mean, the custom is that we read these portions of the Bible quietly, and one of the great rabbis who survived the Holocaust once stopped the Torah reader and said, "Read it out loud, we've already suffered this and more." So it has been a part of our, unfortunately, in the sense of our DNA, but it's not inevitable. I don't look upon it, because if you say it's inevitable, then why bother, why fight it all? I do a lot of traveling, and I also go quite often to Asia. Been to Japan 40 times. We've done exhibitions in New Delhi and Bangalore, and the first Jewish group to have a documentary film on China television in 1993. I've seen a lot of wonderful things evolve, and I've learned a lot from being also in places where there aren't a lot of live Jews. I think maybe one of the most important teaching moments for me came in Japan. Japan's a kind of hobby. The Wiesenthal Center is based on the Asia-Pacific Rim. So that means when I may have learned how to swim in the Atlantic, but I wake up, I'm on the Pacific. And that has an impact. And I've been to Japan roughly half the time to protest and threaten, and the other time to bring exhibitions, and it's not all negative, quite far from it. But about 15 years, one of the leading media companies, well, we caught them with a little help from a friend. They were about to republish the Protocols of Zion again in Japanese. So part of the peace treaty with Japanese companies that always works is that they have to invite myself and usually another person to come and spend the day with their top executives. We've never had repeat problems with any company, because I know after 10 minutes I can read in their body language. What do we have to do never to see these people again? And I've been told by people who are expert on life there, they say, look, whatever you do at the end of your lectures, don't ask if there are any questions, which of course we've been raised the exact opposite. But in some of those societies, if you're asking people to sort of knee-jerk ask a question, it's not done that way, because if you do ask it, they then have to come together as a group, reflect on the question. He said, you know, it's just not worth it. And because I'm born and raised in Brooklyn, of course, I always finish my presentations with, "Are any questions?" One time at this presentation, the executive vice president, no less, of the company, when I ask, stands up and he says, "Yes, Rabbi, we have a question." And he said, "First of all, thank you for coming here today," this is a quote, "to teach us that Jews don't go to synagogue on the Sabbath in order to plot the economic downfall of Japan."
Wow.
And then he went on to summarize, you know, my presentation about the history of the protocols.
So he had been told.
Oh yeah, I mean, they just as an assumption, and this was a way of, you know, publishing the book would be a great way to understand the psyche of the Jew, et cetera, et cetera. So after he summarized in 2 minutes, I said, "Well, you've done a great job in summarizing my hour presentation. What's your question?" Our question is, what do Jews do in synagogue? And when I heard that question, it changed my job description for the rest of my life. So it suddenly dawned on me, wait a second, why would we play this out by the narrative of our enemies? When in fact...
We don't do this, we don't do this,
right,
we don't
but
do this.
in fact,
What do we do?
Especially in places like, I always want like India, 1.4 billion Hindus and hundreds of millions of Muslims, Indonesia. I always wonder, like, why do you even care what Jews have to say? But they do. So this is the other thing that I've learned, but it's an important lesson because I think it applies to a lot, if not most, of our neighbors. The flip side of all of this negative stuff is there's a profound curiosity about the Jews.
Yes.
Wait a second. You live in Los Angeles, but you don't stop talking about Jerusalem. You're an American, but you love the Holy Land. Well, what are your values? Like, who are you? It doesn't actually sort of fit into our understanding. So I find that the overwhelming reaction or interaction with people around the world is not hate, but curiosity. And I think the most important thing, there's an important job for people who are identifying Jews, for whom their Jewishness means something in the diaspora. And that means you're equipped to actually fight anti-Semitism in the most important way, which is, well, we don't beat our wives, and Israel's not an apartheid state, and you know, there's an Arab person in the judge in the Supreme Court, et cetera, et cetera. People are more interested, and I deal a lot. I spend more times at iftars than at shalosh seudases, okay? Muslims as well, because they actually connect that you pray, that you have a minyan, that you keep kosher. They're fascinated. This is all.
They love the greatest hits of wisdom.
Right.
Pirkei Avos goes
right.
a long way.
It's all news. Really, in a sense, it's all. They think they know who we are, but then when they're actually most comfortable with people who are identifying Jews. And believe me, I've been in some interesting places, including in the office of that great war criminal, President Bashir of Sudan. I've been in a lot of interesting places, and I think at the core, the most motivating factor for people who don't maybe they read a lot about Israel and Jews. They may have a lot of strong feelings about it, but they never actually met a Jew. There's a lot that you can disabuse them. So I remember one time this brilliant doctor in London, Sudanese, asked to see me privately. And just to cut to the punchline, I brought along to the meeting at the London Hilton by Tallis and Philin as one of the, to explain. And he looked at me and This guy is 3 grown children who are physicians in England. This is a top guy. He looked at me straight and he said, "What? Jews pray?" So that, I think, also would sort of segue to the next aspect. Here you have a podcast, you got 1 million people following on Facebook. The opportunities to actually put out there who we are, what our values are, unprecedented. And it's not a luxury item. My argument is very simple. If the curiosity is there and you're not filling the void, someone else will, starting with ISIS, neo-Nazis, and a lot of other people in between who don't particularly like us.
So if you find yourself, and you, as you're reporting, you found yourself many times, in a room with an influential person that really doesn't know anything about Jews, but now he's going to pause or she's going to pause and say, "So, tell me about Jews. What is a Jew? What is Judaism?" And you've only got a few minutes.
So
Where do you start?
I'll give you one example that I heard from a number of young Arabs, not in the first meeting, but the second or third. And I heard it enough to understand that this is something that they're taught. "Rabbi, do you believe in the Torah?" "Yes." "Do you believe God gave the Torah?" "Yes." "Do you believe the Torah is the truth?" "Yes." "So why haven't you tried to convert me? You must be a racist."
Right, interesting. Among Christians as well. They're so used to being proselytized, they wonder why we
So
don't.
if you're the holder of truth, and it turns out they hear this from their teachers from a very young age. When I quote for them Maimonides, who says, who is a worthy candidate to go to heaven, it has to do with how you behave, not how you pray. That it's not Judaism and Jewish, it's not an exclusive club for Jews. That to them is a revolutionary kind of takedown. But the only way you could really do that is when you have direct interaction. So I often take people from the Gulf, including from Kuwait, to Israel. I accompany them around Israel. I've taken 2 groups from Indonesia over the years as well. So Israel sells itself. But what I find amazing, we took 2.5 years ago, 24 interfaith leaders from Bahrain to Jerusalem. The most amazing thing that impacted on each of them wasn't going to the Kotel or praying in the mosque Al-Aqsa or going to the church. All of that was important. What broke them, what broke the stereotypes, was when they gave in their passports to the front desk of the 3-star hotel they were staying in. There was Mahmoud and there was Sarah. And they would spend hours with busboys and waiters and saying, well, wait a second, you mean you work with Jews? They allow you to work with them? Yeah, we all get the same salary. I'm respected. You know, if you would ask me, am I happy that they're running things here in the Holy Land and not me? Well, I probably would like it different, but right now I have a job, I have respect, and I'm pretty happy with my life. That to them alone, that one moment when they see in the natural setting with all the other insanity going on, Jews and Arabs working and interacting together, it's mind-blowing. And I think with all the problems that we have also with social media, the whole region right now, especially the younger people in the Gulf, and by the way, also in Iran, when I was their age, they lived in societies where information was totally controlled. So we were the boogeyman. Jews in Israel, Nasser, liberate. The hatred is still there. But there's a lot more information that you can no longer control the flow of information to young people. So when 4 Kuwaitis arrive at the border, at the King Hussein Bridge, and I greet them after they come into Israel, guy gives me a piece of paper. I say, what's this? Well, these are the 30 restaurants we would like to eat in the next 4 days. We did our homework. So, I mean, there are huge changes afoot. They're going to come one way or the other. And it doesn't mean that it's going to land up great for us, but it means that the opportunities to sort of impact on this process are unprecedented. All you have to be able to bring to the table is, if you respect yourself, others will respect you. If you don't, you're not going to have much skin in this game.
Oh, man. Have you been to Pakistan?
So I've met quite a few Pakistanis. My good friend here in LA, Muhammad Khan, who's really a righteous person, has been to my home. We've been to Israel together. We've been to, believe it or not, to Khartoum together. When I meet Pakistanis, I basically say, look, I've only met two types of people from Pakistan. Those that want to do business with you, have, friends, totally normal, and the rest of those folks, they want to kill me because I'm a Jew. Pakistan has to kind of make its mind up which way it's going as a nation and as a society. But I think we have to be really careful, not to fall into the stereotypes. I'm very lucky. I've had access to some amazing, wonderful leaders and mentors and teachers. One of them, Ayad Ya'ari, who's the dean of Israeli experts on the Arab world, Washington Institute. He interviewed all the major Arab leaders. Very courageous guy. In the 1980s, he helped Rabbi Heyer, our founder, and myself, I think, to really sort of demystify the other. Whenever we came, we would meet back then in what today is used as the shul in the King David. Back then it was just the basement, with a Palestinian, recently released usually from jail, former terrorist. And after a half hour, we'd say, look, what you're saying makes so much sense. Let's have a press conference tomorrow, and we can start building blocks towards peace. And each of them would say, yeah, terrific. We can call a press conference at 11. By 2 p.m., I'll be dead. But what it did for us was to, go beyond just the assumptions about the other and start dealing directly with people. And that's a special, for me, that was an amazing gift. And the other part of it also is that in representing the Simon Wiesenthal Center and our educational arm, the Museum of Tolerance, that's a calling card for at least dialogue almost anywhere on the planet. And we use it.
It's so wise what you guys did to set up not, the Holocaust Museum, but rather the Museum of Tolerance, and addressing not just anti-Semitism and genocide of Jews, but the spread of hatred around the world against any people.
Right.
It's believe it in that way.
We're now in the final stages of a new campus called Museum of Tolerance Jerusalem. And the difference between the two, number one, will be twice the size of the one in West LA. But half of our museum in Los Angeles, 7 million people have visited, is about the Shoah. As Rabbi Heyer says, in quoting King David's Psalms, it's about sur me'ra. Remove yourself from evil. Learn what evil is. Come up with the strategies not to get enmeshed in that in terms of your own personal life. What we're building in Jerusalem is the second part of that quote from King David, Aseh Tov.
Too good.
You already have Yad Vashem. Our museum there is going to be trying to answer the question, how did we survive as a people for 2,000 years? And now that we have, can we survive each other with the differences, that we have? But the goal there is, certainly for Jewish people coming out of it, is to feel a sense of pride and to recommit to do some mitzvot, good deeds. That's good deeds not only with and for Jews. We expect probably the majority of our visitors won't even be Jewish. But the idea that Jerusalem, always as that font of Torah and knowledge and inspiration, should be a source of dialogue and inspiration for all people who are smart enough to show up and take a piece of the light of the holy city.
Yes. Amen. The reason I asked you about Pakistan before is because we have a bunch of followers in Pakistan. And one is a young lady who is the head of a Noahide community, which is not an easy thing, I think, to do in Pakistan. But they're growing. She just started. They already have 200-300 people. I think they just had a Rosh Hashanah with a shofar for 300 people. And we sent them a little bit of funds, and they could always use more. But imagine, I mean, right there in Pakistan, I mean, they're learning Torah, they're learning Jewish history, and they're taking the Noahide commandments, and particularly the first commandment, which we talk about a lot, to know about God, to know God, K-N-O-W. And it's just so true. You said before, people are curious why we don't proselytize them. And it's because, well, Judaism teaches that you don't have to be a Jew to have a place in the world to come.
Right.
Everyone, as you said, who by their behavior earns that spot, it's not through your beliefs, it's through your actions. But there's just so much that you can learn from this 3,000-year-old tradition, you know, to help you do good, to help you
Right.
treat people as you want to be treated, to help you learn. You know, simple teachings like, you know, who is honored? One who honors others, right? Who is strong? One who conquers his impulses. We had a Super Bowl party for the homeless that we did as a joint effort between Accidental Talmudist and Meyer Kay. You know, it was just a great young, I don't know how to describe him. He's an activist for good things and good life out of New York. And we just brought in homeless people who don't get to watch the Super Bowl, you know, into Temple Beth Am and had a party with them. And when I shared with this guy, you know, who's trying to get his life together, get off drugs, that who is strong is one who conquers his impulse, it was like his eyes opened up. That's what Judaism teaches? That was amazing to him.
You know,
Touched him.
you mentioned about homeless. It is a great organization here in LA called Food on Foot.
I don't know that one.
Well, you should Google it and come down on a Sunday. It's run by a guy named Jay Goldinger, obviously Jewish name. He's volunteered now, I think, for 1,300 consecutive Sundays. And basically what it is, it's bootstrapping homeless who want to get back into a real life. And it works for about 80+% of the participants. I won't go in.
That's big results for the
It's the
homeless.
exact opposite of the federal programs. A couple of caveats, the first of which, they take no government funds. They don't want to be. And it's tough love, random drug testing. It's a worthwhile model to be emulated elsewhere. And if you're in the Southern California area, it's worthwhile going down on a Sunday. So I'm a little bit involved. I give them, you know, whatever, the $98 club, monthly club, you know, giving money to the homeless in a way that is going to help someone, hopefully, you know, get off the street. And what really moved me about this amazing approach was that at the end of the 2 hours you're there on a Sunday giving out food and blankets to the homeless, some of whom will become, you know, he brings together the folks who've just been involved in a week of cleaning up the streets under supervision. Maybe the first week, maybe the 14th week. They're in a circle, and they give out little awards like $20 to thing from McDonald's, or tokens, or even a round trip on a bus to go anywhere in the States, depending on how far along you are. But there's one caveat. Even if you're in your first week, you get nothing unless you can describe for everyone one act of random kindness you have done. And that, for me, as a rabbi, and, you know, studied all the years, to hear that as such, you know, it's a core Jewish value.
Yeah.
And it's really a core value for humanity. That kind of presentation, that's really our job. And, you know, we should never be in the business of trying to figure out who God elects to move the pieces forward. That's the kind of moment and hashkafa, of a worldview that not only works for us, it should be out there for everyone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, a teaching like, and I know your time is limited, I think we have about 10 minutes. A teaching like, you know, everyone has an obligation to tithe, including one who receives charity from the community. He has to give 10% of what he receives, even though he's living on charity. This idea that study, that learning, that growing in knowledge is like a core human obligation and even a core human need. I think that's very Jewish. But when people hear that, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You know, not just to have a job, to feed yourself, to raise your kids, but to be growing in wisdom at all times. For us to share that value and the value of the value is so important.
Right. And on the other hand, I think we have to be careful. President Carter just got at the hospital again, which, okay, she lived to be 120. When I hear people who say, I'm a good person in my heart, blankety blank, Judaism, wants you to have a pure heart, wants you to work towards that goal. But while you're doing all of that, get off your you-know-what and do good deeds.
Yeah.
Because all the good intentions in the world will not change the world just a little bit. And you never know. I was at someone's home, a person who lost a parent a few weeks ago, and I heard this, actually I heard Rabbi Har say, and maybe one of your listeners will say who the source is. So the rabbis tell us that, we're actually going to be judged twice after we die. Once, when we first die, we go before the heavenly court. I sure hope I get Perry Mason on my side. But then they tell us, I think the Talmud says that you're also judged just before the resurrection of the dead, before the end of why? And the answer is that for every deed that we do, the implications down the road, we don't ourselves know. So bad enough we do something bad, but think of the good deeds that you do, the potential of what could have been done, and think about that final judgment, hopefully, which will always, carry positive news for us. But that's a good thought to really carry with you, which is like, is one small good deed going to make a difference? So if you're not a member of Chabad, you may have some doubt whether that's the case. But I think that is also a core Jewish value. Go ahead and do the good deed. Go ahead and help somebody in need. And whatever existential thunderstorm or doubts that you may have, pursue it, study it, but don't use that as an excuse.
Correct.
Not to do the good deed.
To do the good deed, and I think I just read this, Avigdor Miller, Rabbi Miller said, when you do a deed, you have an opportunity to do it, in the name of, let's say, your grandfather. You're going to give to charity, you're going to give some food to that person on the street, you're going to go spend your day working with that organization you just named. And to say, I'm going to do that in the merit of my grandmother, of my dad, of blessed memory, whoever it is, you can picture at the moment that you're doing that deed, that ancestor of yours breaking out into a big smile, that he's being recalled and associated with this good that you're doing. That's the kind of thing that you said, a person's already passed away, and yet their deeds are continuing to
Right.
do good, and you'll be judged favorably for that.
Yeah, and I think also one of the things about going to the Soviet Union, as an activist in all these demonstrations, I was so naive because I thought I was going to help the Jews in Russia. Whatever little I did, but what I got in return, in terms of inspirational memories and lessons for life, for the people I met, far outweighed whatever small stuff that we have done. And I think that's also true for all of us, is that you enter a situation, let me do a favor for someone, or I'm going to be nice to homeless today. When you look back at that experience, it follows, that Hebrew verb, naton, right? To give. Mm-hmm. And you could spell it backwards and forwards. It's the same word. You have, nun, taf, nun. Very simple. Our approach to life is supposed to be, whatever you're going to be giving in charity and charitable acts, it can come back. That's a given. If you understand that, and it's also kind of liberating, and it also, I would hope, takes you, maybe down a peg in terms of arrogance, something that Americans lead the league in anyway.
You just made me think, I was just at Hoshana Rabbah service a few days ago, and I'm one of those guys that loves to jump up and down and sing. It's a musical, a Karl Bach type of service. The more spirit it is, the better. I really enjoy that. But there was a fellow there who had just moved to LA recently, who's in a wheelchair, and kind of big, heavy-duty, controlled wheelchair with the little joystick, because he's really mobility challenged, and so are his limbs. And he needed to go to the restroom. So I helped him to get there. He's not familiar with that synagogue, and so he went, and luckily it was it's an accessible restroom. And he was inside, so he didn't need me anymore. I went back to the room, and I had propped the door open so that he wouldn't have a problem leaving. So then I'm getting into the spirited prayer part of it, and then I'm thinking, what if that door closed? The paper towels I jammed under the door to keep it open. What if they slipped and this got caught, in the bathroom? But right now I'm in the middle of the best part of the service. I'm jumping up and down. I don't want to miss that. Oh, I'm gonna go. So I went out. He was fine. The door hadn't closed on him. I did miss that part of the service, but I waited, and then I came back with him. And it's just a small illustration. I'm not telling the story to give myself a pat on the back. In fact, I'll share in a moment why I really tell the story. But I will say that as I came back with